I, a 25-year-old female, have recently moved to a new city, which is something a lot of people from my home city are doing. Thus, there's a specific group on Telegram for people from my home city to find housemates or rental buddies. Ben reached out to me after I posted my expectations in the group saying that he was interested. He said that he would want to meet up first. I figured it was a good idea to meet a few times before going house hunting together, so we set up a lunch meeting. During lunch, the only thing that annoyed me was him saying that he hoped that I could lower my budget. I felt like this was a waste of time as clearly our expectations weren't compatible. However, things went weird after our lunch. When walking towards the subway station, he kept tapping me on my shoulder occasionally. Although I felt that this was weird, I convinced myself that maybe that's just how he is generally. Based on our previous chit-chat, I learned where Ben lives and he's supposed to get off at Station A and switch to another line, which I would get off at Station B about 2 stops after Station A and switch to another line. Because I'm quite new to this city, I didn't realize that he hadn't gotten off at Station A until I had to get off myself. He followed me off and switched lines with me, while trying to start up a different conversation. One stop before the actual station that I live nearby, I told Ben that I had to get off here to do some shopping, and I was ready to say my goodbye. Ben followed me off again and went to the grocery store with me. I kept telling him that he could leave and that I was fine shopping by myself, but he insisted to stay. Every time I turned around in the grocery store, Ben was standing really close to me. Like if he had boobs, they would be in my face. I felt super uncomfortable, then grabbed 2 bottles of water and went to the cashier. When I was paying, Ben grabbed my water and offered to take those to the Airbnb that I was staying. I tried to decline politely, but he wouldn't hand me back my water. I didn't want to have my body touch with him, so I didn't try to take the water back with force, and I kinda let him take those waters back to my Airbnb. I'm stupid, I know. Ben made his way into the common area of my Airbnb. It's a shared house type. I didn't even invite him in. And then he kept trying to start more and more conversations with me. At several points, it was completely silent, but he still wouldn't leave. In the end, after hours, I had to ask him to leave. Days afterwards, he still kept texting me weird messages, which I didn't reply to at all. I blocked him after I moved out of the Airbnb as I didn't want to upset him when he still knew where I lived. This happened back in 2020. I'm a female and was 19 at the time. My mom used to be a baker and she needed some chocolates for decoration. Since my siblings were asleep, my mom asked me to get some from the nearby shop. As it was close by, I thought that I would just walk. Most of the shops that I went to were closed due to an ongoing strike. Unfortunately, I was unaware of it and the ones that were open didn't have the brand of chocolate that my mom wanted. Due to the strike, the place looked like a ghost town with not a soul in sight. I was determined to get that chocolate, so I walked a bit further but still had no luck. Finally, I decided to head home. I could reach home either by a long route or a short one. Since the short route includes trespassing through the neighbor's property, I chose the long one mainly because I didn't want to cause any inconvenience to them. As I was walking, a van with 2 men passed me and stopped right in the middle of the road a couple of meters ahead of me. I didn't think much of it because I assumed they might be lost and looking for directions. Suddenly, the man in the passenger seat stuck his head out of the window, turned back, and looked at me. His gaze moved in a way that he examined me from head to toe. He then gave me a creepy smile and sat back. I immediately thought to myself, why did he look at me like that? But since it seemed physically harmless, I brushed it off and continued walking. The back of the van had this large see-through window which I could see both men talking to each other right after the creepy gesture. As I was about to reach the back of the van, the driver did the exact same thing as the guy in the passenger seat. He stuck his head out, turned back to look at me, and sat back, all the while smiling creepily. And that's when my alarm bell started to ring and I quickly moved away from there. Fortunately, this happened right beside the short route. I immediately changed my direction and started walking towards the short way, which was a narrow path. As soon as they noticed me taking a different way, they sped off. I was quite shaken up, especially by the fact that they sped off the very moment that I took the short way. I'm not sure what they were planning to do with me, but considering the area looked pretty deserted and me being a smaller person, I would have been an easy target for whatever they had in mind. I'll never forget the way they looked at me. It was as if a predator was eyeing its prey. On my first summer back home from my freshman year of college, I picked up a part-time job delivering pizza in a town around 30 minutes away from where I lived. The area, in rural Georgia, is known for having places that are in the middle of nowhere, and the pizza place's whole shtick was that it delivered to even to the most remote areas imaginable within the town limits. I could fill books with the weird experiences that summer, from the call that came from a long-abandoned warehouse to the dog that got excited about the pizza in my hand and accidentally shredded my pants with her claws. But one will always stand out in my mind as the creepiest. It was getting fairly late at night, around 10:30, so I was confident at the time that I would be sent on no further calls before closing at 11. However, someone barely managed to miss the cutoff time, and our clerk accepted their order since they were so close. I was given the address and a single box of hot dough and sent on my merry little way. The first red flag was the driveway, or rather the lack thereof. There was a mailbox but no actual driveway, not even gravel. It was really just grass, and a barely distinguishable trodden pathway that resembled more of a service trail than it did something frequently used. I bumped along, wondering if I was even en route to the place, when I saw a slightly above average sized house coming over the horizon, horribly dilapidated and completely surrounded by overgrown woods. I guesstimated where the rest of the driveway led, and ended up parking in a grassy patch that could have been the walkway just as easily as it could have been the front yard. Headlights aimed towards the porch as per company policy. I walked up to the door, but I believe that calling it a door is generous. It was a door frame, all right, but the door itself was just a large slab of wood, propped haphazardly against the side of the house, barely covering the entrance. This was red flag number 2. The third and fourth red flag were also on the door. This included the A4 sheet of printer paper with the words, "Around back," scribbled in all caps, which was hanging just below the place where somebody had self-engraved the door with the title, Manson Family Ranch. Typically, I would never go around to the back of a house, especially a shady unlit house, and especially at night. However, it was my last drop of the day, and I was ready to get it over with and be on my way home. Against my better judgment, I went around to the back of the house. The door back there was an actual door, but it was covered in both cobwebs and fresh spiderwebs. Clearly this was a door that had not been used in some time. I found the cleanest area available and knocked. I counted to 45 and knocked again. There were no lights on in the house, and I could hear no movement from inside. I knocked and counted again, and repeated the sequence 3 more times before I was finally creeped enough to decide to return back to my car. As I turned, I finally heard a voice coming from inside the house, clearly agitated, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. I tried to knock one more time, and as I was counting, I heard something in the woods behind me. It started out as just movement deep in the trees, but soon enough, I could make out distinct running footsteps coming directly towards me through the brush. As I'm standing there, coming to terms with my impending demise, I followed the direction of the noise to the edge of the woods, which is around 15 feet away from me. In the moonlight, I could clearly see the woman who had stepped out. She was relatively old, in her 60s I would guess. She had long blonde gray hair, which was tangled and matted and hung down past her hips. She was in what looked to be originally a white nightgown, but at the time it was dingy and closer to a beigeish brown color. She was absolutely barefoot, and her feet were covered in dirt and what had to be blood, presumably due to the fact that she had just sprinted through the prickly woods, where there was no trail to be seen. I never learned her name, but I still affectionately refer to her as Red Flag Number 5. She stopped short when she saw me, and started to shake her head no with her eyes wide. I stood there like a terrified deer in the most messed up headlights ever, as she took a few more steps towards me, reaching out to me finger pointed. Her voice came out way stronger than mine would have at the time when she spoke. You know how southern people can either sound like loving grandmothers or backwoods killers? Well, she sounded like the latter when she drawled. "Oh, no, 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 no. No, honey, no. You get on, get on out of here." I wish I could say that I listened. I ran, I laughed. But I was so in shock at how the events were playing out that my own self-preservation was put on the back burner, while I tried to figure out just what in the Kentucky Fried F was happening. She seemed to realize that I was not moving, even if I could not make my mouth move to ask her what was happening, or even what to do with the stupid pizza in my hands. She looked at me like she could have smacked the heck out of me right then and there, and proceeded to deliver Red Flag Number 6 through 12. "Darling, did you hear me? You deaf or dumb? Young girls like you come out here and then they don't get to leave." So, I finally quit being the dumb person in a horror movie when I realized that this was not a funny little ghost story. This was a 5'3", 116-pound me, potentially being targeted to be robbed or kidnapped, or worse. So I dropped the dumb little pizza, which had serious serial killer toppings by the way, and started running back to my car, which I had stupidly left on and unlocked, as was usual for most of my deliveries. As I neared the car, I heard a slam from behind me, and I looked over my shoulder to see that the wooden door had been pushed over and had fallen into the porch beneath it. As I was closing the car door, an older man was limping down the front steps, waving his arms like an airplane runway attendant at me, calling me a little bee, telling me to get out of the car right now. At a loss for what to do, I called out something muttery and shaky, and along the lines of, "Pizza's out back." I floored my dad's crappy little 90s Lexus and somehow managed to avoid trees on the out trail back to the main road, which was still 12 miles and several turns from any road that actually had a name, let alone painted lines. I reported it to my manager, and he said that he contacted police, but nothing ever came of it that I'm aware of. Either way, that was my first and hopefully last personal encounter with the self-proclaimed Manson Family Ranch. This happened almost 4 years ago. My parents and my husband were visiting my mom's family in Indianapolis. I used to go all the time as a child, but I wouldn't know my way around. I was drinking a lot because my husband had an emotional affair with his ex that lasted 4 months. She tried to break us up. Honestly, I could write a whole post about how she tried to ruin our relationship. So we saw my family and then went back to the hotel. I was upset, so I said that I was going to smoke. In reality, I was going to the hotel bar. I got multiple double vodka shots with a splash of orange juice, and I was feeling good. The bar was closing, so I asked the bartender where there was another bar, and she told me to go to TGIF's. It was about a 10-minute walk. Remember, this was after 10 p.m. and I was already pretty drunk. I went inside and I got more drinks. I don't remember how I got back outside, but I was smoking and there were people outside in the parking lot with me. Suddenly, I was being dragged into a car. I don't know how long it had been. I was so drunk that I couldn't do anything or even realized how messed up I was. During this time, my husband realized that I was missing and woke up my mom in my parents' room, and he tracked my phone to the TGIF parking lot. My mom and husband got to my phone, but I wasn't there. Then my mom saw this man trying to get me in his car. She got out of the Uber that they were in and started screaming to let me go. And this guy thought that my mom was just a stranger trying to save me. He didn't believe her, and I remember her yelling. I only remember him saying, "How do I know she's your daughter?" and something like that. He had grabbed me, so I had bruises on my arm. My mom threatened to call 911, which I was told later, since I was almost in his car. He let go of me and drove off with his back passenger door wide open. I'm convinced that I would have been taken at the very least. I was unfamiliar with the area, I was drunk, and I barely realized how bad the situation was. I was taken to the hospital, checked in. I was released the next day. I didn't hear about what my mom and my husband saw until we got home, since we were driving home that entire day. I'm a mother of 2 daughters and live out in the country. My husband is a welder and a really outgoing and charismatic guy, which means that he has tons of friends that will periodically stop by to hang out with him. In fact, there are some friends he trusts enough to use the tools in his garage and stay at the house when he isn't home. Well, one late evening he was gone when I heard someone pull into the driveway. We have 2 dogs who were going nuts with barking at the picture window in our living room. I looked out and saw a familiar looking blue blazer and assumed my husband's friend, Bob, was over to use something from the garage or to wait for my husband to get home. He hadn't knocked on the door, so I figured they had already talked to each other about it. No big deal. But the dogs wouldn't stop barking and growling, which just didn't seem right because they knew Bob. So I looked more closely out the window and realized that there was a man lingering near the garage, but he was not Bob. In fact, I had never seen him before. I decided to take my dogs and go outside to see who he was and what he wanted. He had told me that he lived down the street and that he knew my husband. He was very friendly and began telling me all about how he had to move out of his house because he and his wife were divorcing. He seemed quite familiar with my husband, and even asked about our dog, Pepper, who had passed away a few months prior. Pepper was a very smart and protective dog, and could be scary if he thought harm would come to me or my family. He didn't realize that Pepper had died, and really seemed genuinely apologetic about it. Meanwhile, I noticed that my dog's shadow still hadn't settled down around this guy. He wouldn't let him pet him, and the hair on his back was sticking straight up. And he would intermittently growl during our conversation too. This was really odd for him, and I was pretty confused because this guy seemed really nice. After chatting for a while, he asked for my husband's number so he could call him. That was a red flag for me, because if my husband wanted someone to have his number, he would have given it to them. So I told the man that I would give him a call right then. I called my husband in front of the man, who suddenly looked a little nervous. I explained to my husband that Jim from down the street was at the house to visit him. Immediately, my husband told me to tell Jim to get off our property and to never return. This scared the crap out of me, because like I said, my husband is really friendly and hospitable usually. He told me to make the man leave and he was on his way home. I ended up making up some excuse to Jim. For some reason, I just couldn't say something so mean to him after he had been so friendly and polite to me. And he backed up right away, suddenly quick to leave. My husband arrived home a short time later and explained that Jim was a severe drug addict who had been stealing from all of his neighbors' garages. His wife threw him out of the house because of this, and he's been desperate for cash to support the habit. He was proudly scoping out what he could steal from my husband's garage and seeing what obstacles my dogs would be in his way. To think he could have harmed me or my kids, it makes me furious. But he seems so nice, and I felt like an idiot for not realizing the truth. I've learned my lesson now, though. If somebody comes over that I don't know while my husband is out, I just call him right away. Update. My husband told me tonight that Jim was arrested and is currently in jail now. He apparently was caught robbing from my neighbor's garage. Good riddance.